don't just fax those? Sorry.
We call Amber Rasmussen.
Yeah, if I send you the notes, these tables.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God? I do. You may be seated.
Can you please state your name and spell it for the benefit of the court reporter?
Amber Rasmussen, AmberRasmussen.
And where are you employed?
I am employed at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Milwaukee.
And what is your position there?
I am a DNA analyst in the DNA analysis unit.
And how long have you been a DNA analyst?
I have been employed as a DNA analyst for just over 10 years.
And what is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology and Human Biology from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, as well as a Master's of Science in Forensic Science from Marshall University.
And what are your primary duties as a forensic scientist in DNA analysis?
As a DNA analyst, we will receive evidence, analyze that evidence for any possible biological materials, attempt to develop a DNA profile from that evidence, make any comparisons to known individuals, write a report on our findings, and testify to those findings in court if needed.
And have you received any specialized training in the areas of DNA analysis?
Yes, in addition to my education, I also received approximately 9 months of on-the-job training prior to being signed off as a full DNA analyst. I also undergo annual training and review current literature.
And are you a member of any professional organizations related to forensic science?
Yes, I am a member of both the Midwest Association of Forensic Science as well as the American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
And is your laboratory accredited by any organization?
Yes, we are accredited by ANAB, which is an acronym for another acronym, but it is American National Accreditation Board, ASQ, National Accreditation Board.
And is there any sort of proficiency testing or peer reviewing that you participate at your laboratory?
Yes, we participate in both proficiency testing and peer review. Proficiency testing is when an external company provides us a test with known results, and we work that test as if it were a case and send our results back to them, and they verify that we obtain the correct results on that case. Peer review or technical review is when another analyst evaluates our work and work we did on a case, and they review every case. Another trained analyst will review every case that we work within the lab.
And what actually is what people commonly refer to as DNA? What actually is it?
DNA is often referred to as the building block of life. It is present in all living things. It is the same throughout your body. It is unique to each individual except for identical twins, and it's what makes you who you are. It's what makes you a human. It's what determines your genetic characteristics.
And how do you test for DNA, or what's the process you use?
So for forensic testing, we look at areas of DNA that aren't typically associated with physical characteristics. They are areas often referred to as junk DNA, but we have found these areas that are vary from individual to individual, and one individual may have the same DNA type at a location as another, but when we look at multiple types, that will vary from person to person, and we can use that totality of DNA types within an individual's DNA profile to differentiate between DNA from different people.
Now, when I read these reports, there's something called an STR. What is an STR?
An STR is a specific reference to the type of DNA we look at. STR stands for short tandem repeat, which is the small repeated sequences of DNA that we use for our analysis.
And is that kind of analysis a commonly or generally accepted procedure in forensic science?
Yes, it is.
And how do you go about doing a STR DNA analysis?
So first we will take an item of evidence, whether it is swabs or clothing, and we will take a sample from that item, and we will subject that sample to a series of reagents in order to break open any cells that may be present, clean up that sample from anything that is not DNA, and end up with a small volume of liquid that contains purified DNA. We will then take that small sample and count how much DNA is present and run it through our system to make copies of those areas that we use in our analysis.
Now, I've placed a document in front of you that has been labeled in another way, Exhibit 22. Can you please take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize it?
Is this the document?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, this is a copy of my confidential report of laboratory findings for laboratory case R20-2992, dated June 25th, 2021. And I can tell that it is my report because there is my signature on the first page and my initials on each subsequent page.
So, did you review that report before coming to testify today?
Yes.
And is this, as far as you can, is this a true and accurate copy of your report?
Yes.
I'd like to move Exhibit 22 into evidence. Now, in this case, is this case related to the Kyle Rittenhouse? This report related to the Kyle Rittenhouse case?
Yes.
And what did you receive to test for DNA in this case?
In this case, we received 3 sets of swabs from a firearm, 2 sets of swabs from an ammunition magazine, and 3 standard or reference samples from known individuals.
What is a standard or reference sample?
A standard or reference is a sample that is directly collected from a person, and we use that to establish what that individual's DNA profile is, and we can then use that for comparison to any questioned evidentiary profiles we obtain.
In the 3 standards, in this case, you received from Joseph Rosenbaum, Anthony Huber, and Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Now, Kyle Rittenhouse's standards is called a buccal swab. What is that?
A buccal swab is a swab of the buccal cells, which are the inside of your cheek, contains buccal swabs. So these are basically swabs that are taken from the inside of a person's mouth.
And the ones from Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Huber are dried blood standards. What are those?
Dried blood standards are when blood is applied to usually a card, and then we can take a sample of that blood to develop a profile.
So you can get the DNA from the dried blood.
Yes.
And you talked about swabs from a firearm and from some ammunition magazines. Can you describe how that process is done?
Which part of the process?
I'm sorry. What do you mean by swabs? Like, what do you actually receive?
So in this case, what was received were envelopes containing swab boxes, which are small boxes that contain basically a wooden stick with cotton on the end, a long-handled Q-tip. And each of those boxes was marked as having been collected from a different area of either the firearm or from a magazine. In this case, there was 1 set of swabs marked as having been collected from a trigger, another from a barrel guard, and another from a pistol grip, and then 2 sets from a magazine. And what we do is we will cut off the cotton portion of that swab, and that is what proceeds in our testing to try to develop a DNA profile.
So is it your understanding that someone would have taken that swab, swabbed the parts or the items that are listed, and then packaged it up and sent them to you?
Yes.
So it's being represented to you that the gun has been swabbed by these Q-tips?
Yes.
Or not technically Q-tip, but. Now, did you find any DNA on any of those swabs?
Yes.
Where did you find DNA?
There was DNA detected on all 5 of those evidentiary items.
And what did you do once DNA was detected?
I attempted to develop a profile from each of those, and then attempted to interpret those profiles and make any comparisons to those.
Now, for the trigger swab, was there any DNA found from the trigger swab?
Yes.
And who was the source of that DNA?
A single source male profile was obtained from the swabs from the trigger, and Kyle Rittenhouse is the source of that DNA profile.
Now, the next finding is swabs from the barrel guard. Is that a part of a gun?
Yes.
And what were the findings on the barrel guard?
The barrel guard contained a mixture of DNA, so there was DNA present from at least 2 people. This contained DNA from at least 1 male, and assuming that there were 2 people present, I was able to do a comparison to each of the 3 different individuals in this case. Would you like me to read those results as well?
Let me ask you one question before you do that. You said you used a process or a procedure called STR mix. Just briefly, what is that?
STR Mix is a software program that helps us to interpret DNA and analyze DNA profiles, and it also helps to perform comparisons to the DNA profiles.
Is this the standard you use when there are potential mixtures?
It is most often used for mixtures, yes.
Is it the only thing your lab uses for mixtures now?
We do, in certain cases, we do have, we can not use this software and we can do a manual interpretation.
Now, what were your findings on the barrel guard?
For the barrel guard, this was a 2-person mixture, and assuming there are 2 people present, we compared 2 different hypotheses or propositions or explanations for the data. The first explanation is that this DNA profile came from the person of interest and an unknown individual, and the second is it came from 2 unknown individuals. So in this case, there were 3 different persons of interest, which were each compared separately to that mixture profile. There was strong support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 70,000 times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture from 2 unknown individuals than it is a mixture resulting from Joseph Rosenbaum and an unknown individual. There is very strong support for exclusion for Anthony M. Huber in this mixture. It is at least 2 billion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from 2 unknown individuals than Anthony M. Huber and another unknown individual. And there is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown individual than if it is a mixture resulting from 2 unknown individuals.
So am I understanding that there's strong support to exclude Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber on that DNA analysis, but very strong support to include Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Now, were the next item is the swabs from the pistol grip. What were the results from that? And was that also with the STR mix?
This was also a 2-person mixture, including at least 1 male, and it was also interpreted using the StarMix software.
So what were the findings on that item?
Because this was a 2-person mixture, our possible explanations are the same. We have either the person of interest and an unknown or 2 unknown individuals. And for the pistol grip, There is strong support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 657,000 times more likely to observe this profile if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture resulting from Joseph D. Rosenbaum and another unknown individual. There is strong support for exclusion for Anthony M. Huber. It is at least 13,000 times more likely to observe this profile if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture from Anthony M. Huber and another unknown individual. And there is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown than if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals.
Is it fair to say that's essentially the same findings as the swabs from the barrel guard, but the numbers and the likelihoods are different?
They are similar conclusions, yes.
Now, the next item is the magazine swabs. What were your findings from the magazine swabs?
There were 2 sets of magazine swabs submitted in this case. The first set was a low-level 2-person mixture that contained DNA from at least one male. And this was also interpreted with star mix.
And what were the results?
There is moderate support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 2,670 times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture from Joseph D. Rosenbaum and an unknown individual. The conclusion was uninformative for Anthony M. Huber. The statistical value generated for his comparison has been seen for both individuals known to be included in a mixture and known not to be included. So our laboratory will not make a conclusion in this statistical range. There is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown than if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals.
Now, so in terms of Mr. Huber, you cannot either exclude or include him.
Correct. The amount of DNA present from the second contributor, and this is a low-level mixture, there was less information present, so we are less able to make a definitive answer one way or another.
What is a low-level mixture?
Low level just means that there isn't much DNA present, or not our ideal amount of DNA for performing an interpretation. So there is less DNA than a full profile from all of the contributors to the mixture.
Does there have to be a certain amount or a certain quality of DNA present in order for your laboratory to continue with testing?
We have a threshold where so we count I mentioned earlier, we count how much DNA is in a sample, and we have a threshold where we have determined we may get results. Anything below that does not continue in our laboratory process. But as far as once results are generated, we will see if we can make comparisons. Sometimes there isn't enough data to make comparisons.
Now, the last item here is the second set of magazine swabs. What were the findings there?
This was also a low-level 2-person mixture with at least one male present, and this was also interpreted using the StarMix software.
And again, what were the findings?
The presence of Joseph D. Rosenbaum's DNA within this mixture was uninformative. Statistical values in this range have been observed for both individuals known to be included in a mixture and known to not be included in a mixture, so we will not make a conclusion regarding his presence of DNA in the mixture. Anthony M. Huber was also uninformative. Statistical values such as those obtained for his profile are inconclusive, and we will not make a conclusion. And Kyle H. Rittenhouse, there was strong support for inclusion of his profile within the mixture. it is at least 874,000 times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown individual than if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals.
What is touch DNA?
Touch DNA is the term that is often used to refer to the DNA that is transferred to an item when a person touches or handles it.
And is it more or less likely to transfer DNA in a touch DNA situation than, say, if bleeding onto an item?
Body fluids are a definite source and good source of DNA. Touch DNA will vary greatly in the amount of DNA contained in the resulting sample. It will vary based on how long the object was handled, how much friction or pressure was involved, how recently that individual had washed their hands, if they had touched their face prior to touching the item. There are quite a number of factors. So touch DNA has much more variance in the quality of DNA obtained.
So, assuming your hand is not bleeding or doesn't have any sort of other bodily fluid on it, what kind of cells would you be expecting to find if it's touch DNA? Like from where in the body or what fluids in the body?
Touch DNA is often from skin cells or transferred from, as I said, usually touching your face is the most likely source of DNA, or touching any other items may also be a secondary transfer of DNA.
So if I touch this television here briefly, I may or may not leave DNA behind on it.
You probably left DNA behind. Whether it was enough to be detectable via our methods is a different question.
But if I sat here and touched it for a longer period of time, or if my hands were particularly sweaty, would it be fair to say that it'd be more likely there'd be enough DNA to test?
Yes.
Now, we in the courtroom have seen a video that shows Mr. Huber making contact with the firearm that was in question here. How could it be that Mr. Huber makes contact with the firearm and does not leave DNA behind?
As far as leaving DNA behind or being detected on the samples we received, touch DNA, again, can vary. There may have been very little DNA on his hands when he handled that object. It may have been wiped away later. The sample may have been exposed to heat or moisture or undergone a duration of time before it was collected, and all of those things will limit the amount of DNA that can be detected.
Is it true, let me ask it this way, does your lab have restrictions on what they will accept in terms of items for simply touch DNA analysis?
Yes.
And why is that, to the best of your knowledge?
We have submission guidelines for touch DNA items. They are less likely to result in usable DNA profiles, and we will not accept touch DNA items on nonviolent cases.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-exam.
Can I ask you, Ms. Rasmussen, when you get a sample to be tested, who tells you what area, in this case, so there's a firearm, right? You test?
The DNA unit did not receive the firearm itself in this case.
What did you receive?
We received swabs that were collected from a firearm.
Okay. And so when law enforcement sends those to you, they tell you this swab was taken from this area of the firearm or this area of the firearm, and we'd like you to test it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that you never got a swab from the barrel of that gun?
The barrel guard was the closest, to my knowledge, that was obtained from the barrel of the gun.
Do you know what a barrel guard is?
I do not.
Okay. You'd agree, however, it's listed barrel guard. There's nothing on here listing barrel of gun.
Correct.
So if, for example, Joseph Rosenbaum touched the barrel of that gun, we'll never know that, right?
I have no way of determining it.
Because it wasn't sent to you for analysis, right?
Yes.
Now, Jim. Mr. Rasmussen, I'm going to show you what has been marked exhibits 45 and 46 for identification. I just would like if you can tell me what you see in those exhibits.
In Exhibit 45, I see a person walking the opposite direction of whoever's taking the photo, and a person on the ground, and there's an object connecting them. The person on the ground appears to be holding on to the object.
Okay. Jim, can you tell me if you agree? No disagreement that the person on the ground is Mr. Rittenhouse? No disagreement that the person standing up is Mr. Huber?
No disagreement.
No disagreement that the object in between them is a firearm?
No disagreement.
Okay. So, Mr. Rasmussen, if I told you that person standing there is Anthony Huber, okay, that we agree on that, you agree that it appears Anthony Huber is touching that, and we agree that's a gun. You'd agree that Anthony Huber is touching that gun, right? Appears to be he's touching that gun?
It appears to be.
Okay. Now, in the areas, so the fact there's no DNA present in the areas you were asked to look at doesn't mean that the person didn't actually touch the firearm. We see it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
The DNA, yeah, correct.
Okay. Can you do the other one, please? So if I told you that's a different angle, that's Mr. Rittenhouse on the ground, that's Mr. Huber holding the skateboard, and that's a firearm, you'd agree it appears that Mr. Huber is touching that firearm. Would you agree with that?
That appears to be the case.
Okay. And so the fact that, I don't know where that is on the gun, but the fact that the DNA isn't there, and everybody thinks DNA is this thing that proves everything, you'd agree that we can see he's actually touching the firearm.
What is your question?
Well, the fact that it's not present, and I don't know where on the gun that is, but the fact that DNA is not present in any of the areas of the firearm for Mr. Huber doesn't mean that he didn't actually touch it.
Correct. Whether DNA was detected from an individual or not does not mean that they did not touch that item.
And I think you said, and tell me if I have this right, the shorter amount of time someone touches something, the less likely there'll be DNA which you can compare or find.
Yes, the less an item is handled, the less I would expect there to be an opportunity for DNA to transfer.
Was there ever a follow-up request by law enforcement to test any other areas of that gun?
Not to my knowledge. That may not have gone directly to me, though it may have been to someone else at the crime laboratory.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, I don't remember the numbers. I'd move 40, is it 45 and 46?
Yes.
I'd move 45 and 46, if there's no objection.
No.
And I have no other questions. Thank you for your time, ma'am.
Interview ready?
No.
Let me step down, ma'am. I haven't heard anything about food, so we'll just... Mr. Mayor?
Would you like me to meet this here?
Yeah, well, here.
We have it digitally that we'll submit.
Okay. Although actually, unless you need it, well, go ahead, do it.
No, you can have it. We have
No.
1,000 copies of it if you want it.
Let's fight over it.
Shall we continue?
Please.
This name called Susan Hughes, this thing?
What was that? Push that mic aside.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Ma'am, could you please state and spell your name for the benefit of the court reporter?
Susan Hughes, Hughes.
Ms. Hughes, did you know Anthony Huber?
Yes,
How did you know him?
I am his great aunt.
And
His grandmother was my oldest sister.
and how did you come to know Anthony?
Well, my niece is his mother.
So, did you know him from when he was a child?
Yes.
And would you have considered yourself close to Mr. Huber?
Yeah, even when he was a child, we had kind of a special connection. But I was born in Kenosha. I moved away, came back in 2011, and from that time, we became even closer.
Now, you said you had a special connection. What do you mean by that?
He was a redhead. I used to be a redhead. He was, his immediate family, they were all blondes. So he kind of gravitated to me at family gatherings and things, even though when he was a child, I really only saw him, holidays and when I visited Kenosha, so, 4 or 5 times a year. But even then he would gravitate towards me because I could talk to him about things he was interested in. I mean, we shared interests in art and music and computers, Star Wars, things that little boys like to talk about.
So you said you would see him in Kenosha. Did Anthony grow up in Kenosha?
Yes, he was born here and went to school here.
Do you know if you know what any schools he attended here?
Well, he's in the Southport neighborhood, so I think he went there perhaps. I know he was at St. Mark's for a while. And I don't know, would those kids go to Lance maybe for middle school? I'm not sure.
Norm.
I was living in Madison, so I wasn't real connected to what schools he was going to.
So in 2011, you said you moved back to the Kenosha area,
Yes.
and you said you became more close. What do you mean by that?
Well, from that point, I moved back because I had health issues, and both of my sisters did. So I was seeing his grandmother quite frequently, and Anthony was very close to his grandmother. So I would see him sometimes, once or twice a week. He would call her frequently.